Welcome back, friends. Welcome back to the Corbett Report. I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, coming to you with another edition of Solutions Watch here in March of 2025. And today, we're going to tackle one of those big ideas that I do tackle from time to time here on Solutions Watch. In fact, an idea that is so big that in some way, I think you could say that it pertains to pretty much every solution that is posited or is even capable of being thought of in the general Solutions Watch category, and that we will only be able to do partial justice to today, I think. But at any rate, I think it is good to name it, put it out on the table, and to start thinking about it, because it is going to be an incredibly important thing to work on. What am I talking about? Well, you've already seen the title if you've clicked on this video and or audio, so you probably know we're talking about creating parallel societies. What on earth does that mean, and why do we need to engage in such a task? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I have some answers to those questions. Specifically, if you watched the most recent edition of New World Next Week, namely number 583 with James Corbett of MediaMonarchy.com, where we talked, amongst other things, about Rearm Europe, you will know from that episode that I did say that I think that 2025 very much could be the year of economic cataclysm, or at least chaos, that will cause a lot of people to question some of the bedrock fundamentals of their continued existence. Because times of great economic and financial chaos almost inevitably lead toward greater chaos in the world at large, specifically geopolitically. If you want to know exactly that process, how it happens, why it happens, I would highly recommend that you check out my editorial from last weekend on the trade wars. You Are Not Prepared, which is, of course, up on CorbettReport.com right now for your reading pleasure? Well, edification, anyway, where I go through the latest trade war chaos that is throwing the entire global trading system into absolute bedlam at the moment, and how that portends the beginnings of a hot war scenario. Because, as I point out in this editorial, as Frederick Bastiat did not observe, as he is sometimes attributed with this phrase, but he should have coined this, when goods don't cross borders, soldiers will. And that's probably, unfortunately, some words that we're going to be learning the relevance of in the course of due time if we continue heading down this path of global trade war and then currency war chaos. People in the 1930s would probably have something to teach people in the 2020s about how that goes. But anyway, I would recommend that editorial if you need to be caught up to speed on how that works and what it means and the historical antecedents to the time that we are living through. But if you did read that editorial, you will know that at the end I talk about, well, okay, so what do we do about this? Of course, there is nothing that the average working person can do to really influence the decisions being made in Washington and Ottawa and Beijing and Brussels on tariffs and levies and taxes and other forms of government theft. But there are things we can do to start detaching ourselves from our reliance on this system of international or even national trade, and start connecting with those around us who will be our true partners in the parallel economy if and when our current economic system comes crashing down. The generation that lived through the Great Depression was barely able to squeeze by, and that was a generation that had a connection to the land and knew their neighbors and participated in their community. Can you imagine how quickly the average city dweller in 2025 will perish if we enter into a new, greater depression? Well, that's precisely why my next episode of Solutions Watch is going to be devoted to the all-important question of the creation of the parallel economy. Stay tuned. Well, here we are, and we're talking about not just the finer point of the creation of a parallel economy, but the creation of parallel societies, which I trust you will grant is an even bigger mouthful to chew on. So let's start by wrapping our head around this concept and what it means by taking a look at an extended clip from a very well done Academy of Ideas video that's from 2023, but absolutely, definitely worth your time and attention. I will obviously put the link to this full video in the show notes so you can read it read and watch this in its entirety. I really recommend it. I think it's a good introduction to the subject of parallel societies versus totalitarianism, how to create a free world.
If it proves impossible legally to compel the ruling power to change the ways it governs us, and if for various reasons those who reject this power cannot or do not wish to overthrow it by force, then the creation of an independent or alternative or parallel society is the only dignified solution. The basis for the parallel society was born in the mind of Ivan Yurus, a Czech poet and the artistic director of the rock band The Plastic People of the Universe. After members of this band were arrested in 1976 for refusing to toe the government line, Yurus called on the community of Czech artists to create music labels, publishing houses, concert halls, art expositions, and other such infrastructure that existed independently of mainstream society and outside the grasp of the communist state. Yurus hypothesized that if enough infrastructure were created, an independent society would spontaneously form and function as a pocket of creative freedom in a highly oppressed society. Yurus defined the independent society as a society not dependent on official channels of communications or on the hierarchy of values of the establishment, and as he further explained, the independent society does not compete for power. Its aim is not to replace the powers that be with power of another kind, but rather under this power, or beside it, to create structures that respect other laws, and in which the voice of the ruling power is heard only as an insignificant echo from a world that is organized in an entirely different way. Yurus's idea caught the attention of the Czech Catholic philosopher and mathematician Václav Benda. Benda saw in this idea the seeds of a non-violent solution to the destructiveness of communism. However, for the independent society to have real-world social and political impact, it needed to be extended beyond the realm of music and the arts. For the stifling bureaucracy and heavy hand of the communist government was suffocating all areas of life. And so Benda coined the phrase parallel society to refer to all social, cultural, and economic structures that existed unconstrained by the state. He called such structures parallel structures, and at the height of political oppression in the late 1970s, Benda urged Czech citizens to begin creating parallel forms of education in science and scholarship, parallel political structures, a parallel information network, and free parallel markets that form a parallel economy, and as H. Gordon Skilling explains, outlining the parallel structures which had come into existence or might do so in the future, Benda argued that these might gradually supplant or at least humanize the existing official structures. The rationale behind the creation of parallel structures in the parallel society was simple. As the communist government had a monopoly on force and was too powerful to challenge head-on, it was best to turn away from it and defy it by ignoring it as much as possible. Rather than trying to eliminate oppressive state structures, it was better to build up better ones that could function as alternatives or replacements to the establishment system that was in the process of dying. A well-known communist dissident, Jacek Kuron, captured this rationale in 1980 when he responded to the torching of a communist headquarters by stating, "Stop burning down committees, let us build our own." Or as Ivan Yurus explained, the parallel society began in spontaneous acts of mutual self-defense in different parts of society. Those who take part are active people who can no longer stand to look passively at the general decay, rigidity, bureaucracy, and suffocation of every living idea or sign of movement in the official sphere. And because these people sooner or later recognized that efforts to bring about the slightest improvements in the official sphere were exercises in futility, it was only a matter of time before they said, "Why not invest our talents, abilities, goodwill, and enthusiasm into something that no one will be able to corrupt, that we will be able to decide about ourselves in the end?" The parallel society provided individuals the means to express themselves freely without fear of censorship and to fulfill their goals and aims without being suffocated by the bureaucracy of the state. Furthermore, individuals felt that by turning towards parallel structures and away from the establishment structures that functioned as vehicles of the state, they were influencing society for the better. The parallel society thus served as a much-needed source of hope in a society which had succumbed to apathy due to decades of communist rule. And in the latter half of the 1970s and throughout the 1980s, this hope inspired people throughout all of Eastern Europe, and the parallel society infiltrated many areas of culture and the economy. "Even my most audacious expectations have been considerably surpassed," wrote Benda in 1988. "It is no longer necessary to show that the parallel society is possible. By the late 1980s, the parallel society in Eastern Europe had become so strong, decentralized, and decoupled from the state that the communist authorities lost their grip on power. The revolution which swept through Eastern Europe in the closing months of 1989 was a spontaneous product of the massive discontent and the yearning for freedom of the peoples of those countries. It was also a culmination of the independent activities of many citizens as they sought to defend their rights against the party-state system, and to create a parallel or independent society as a challenge and an alternative to it.
All right, well, I'll cut it there, but I assure you that was not the full video. That was only a representative clip of the full video, which is, once again, entitled Parallel Society versus Totalitarianism, How to Create a Free World. It's from Academy of Ideas, and I recommend it strongly as a good introduction to the concept of parallel society, what that means, and how it has actually functioned in the past. And as always, there's a lengthy and very detailed transcript to that video. If you would like to access that, that link will be in the show notes, and I suggest you do so because I think it is worth your time and attention about an incredibly important idea. How do we carve out a space for greater freedom in our lives in the midst of authoritarian tyranny? From the left, from the right, from whatever section of the deep state may be holding the ring of power at the moment, how do we carve out greater space for freedom to interact and transact with other people as we see fit? Which is an incredibly important thing, as I say, as we step into an era of, at the very least, great economic and financial insecurity, instability, chaos. How do we reach out and start connecting with those around us to form the backbone of a parallel society that will see us through these incredibly trying times? That is the task to which we must orient ourselves and which we must start taking very seriously, because the time is coming where we will not have the luxury of even being able to discuss such things in such a calm and detached manner. So, I think the first of several things that we should note about even what we have just seen in this clip about parallel societies is that, first off, we must reject the black pillars, the doomsayers, who inevitably, when presented with an idea, will inevitably come along and say, well, yeah, but if you just build a parallel society, they will come. It's like the dark version of Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. Okay, well, the proper response to that is, let them come. Because otherwise, the only solution being offered by the black pillars is just lay down. Go along with whatever the system is doing and just don't make a fuss, because if you do, they might take note. They might actually try to do something about it. Oh my God. That is entirely the point. If we do not force the issue, if we do not actually attempt to build anything outside of the structures of control, we will never escape the structures of control. That is the unstated assumption that all of these black pillars and doomsayers would have you swallow unthinkingly. So do not swallow that black pill unthinkingly. Yes, there will be opposition if you build a thriving parallel society, but that is exactly the point. And as we have seen historically, those parallel structures can actually displace authoritarian power. Now, for example, in the Romanian situation with Ceausescu and what happened there, and you know me, I did not fall up the turnip truck yesterday. I know there were much greater generation-long plans that were playing out in the Cold War, and that it was staged and manipulated in various ways, but there were real people who were subject to real authoritarianism, who really risked their lives in creating parallel structures that really did displace authoritarian regimes. That really did happen. And it is absolute madness to me that we would throw out such representative examples without actually studying what took place and why they were effective. So this is an incredibly important subject, and I would just caution against swallowing the black pill that we can't possibly create anything of any substance outside of the system of control because they'll just come after you. Let them come is the proper response to that. And we'll deal with the consequences as they arise. Now, having said that, I think another thing that we need to nip in the bud before it becomes an issue is that when I say that we are talking about the creation of parallel societies today, please note, I am not saying we are talking about the creation of the parallel society or even a parallel society. I'm talking about the creation of parallel societies, because it is very easy for us to adopt the language of our would-be oppressors and the mindset of those oppressors who, of course, want to institute a single, totalitarian, monolithic system of control. Everyone will live under this system, and the only argument is who gets to control that system. That is not what a parallel structure, or more accurately, parallel structures, would look like. No, if we are going to carve out space for freedom in human interaction, that means no one has the blueprint for the parallel society. It must be done in this way, using these steps, and only these things qualify. No one is in charge of this. No one gets to tell you how your parallel society ideas should be run. So let's take an example. So if we start talking about the concept of parallel societies in, say, the US context or the modern Western liberal democratic order context, people might start to think about things like this. From that good old bastion of journalism, the Daily Star, which had in December of 2024 this hard-hitting news article on U.S. town governed by a wizard where everyone is 100% certifiably insane. Talking about what? Oh yes, talking about Slab City, which they helpfully inform us is nestled in the southeastern pocket of California's Sonoran Desert, just 45 miles from the Mexican border. Just 45 miles of the Mexican border. Again, crack journalists over at the Daily Star. Referred to by its residents as the last free place in America, the bizarre, lawless stretch of land is densely populated by drug addicts, eccentrics, army veterans, and hippies. Or as Wizard, the man who greets all who enter Slab City, puts it, everyone is 100% certifiably insane, and I mean that from a clinical perspective. Anyway, then it goes on to talk about Slab City. But if this feels oddly plagiarized, that's because, of course, they are actually just copy-pasting from a spin.com article from earlier in 2024 called A Bad Thing Haunts Slab City, talking about citizens of Slab City, aka America's last free place, and a narco-republic in California, wish their bars hadn't burned to the ground, but things happen. Talking about the dark things that happen in this lawless place. You don't want government? This is what no government looks like. And goes on to talk about the formation of Slab City, what it is, who populates it, and the dark things that happen there. Which, I will note, is a key and interesting thing that pops up every time Slab City is ever mentioned. For example, Slab City exposed homeless growth and the dark side of America's last free place in California. And other such informative, hard-hitting YouTube documentaries. One that actually breaks the mold that I will actually commend to your attention. And all these links will be in the show notes for you to peruse at your pleasure and leisure. But I would recommend Inside Slab City, the lawless city in the desert, last free place in America. Because at the very least, this YouTuber who goes on this journey to Slab City does just talk to the residents there and get from their perspective in a sympathetic way why they are there and what is happening. And for example, the man who's tending the famous installation here, this mountain, and his talk about why he moved out here, because he was a business owner in Florida who was being cited for having the audacity to try to feed the homeless. And he decided, I do not want any part of this. And he moved out to Slab City several years ago. So stories like that are very interesting and instructive. But as I say, all of this is to say that this is what people, if I say we're going to talk about creating parallel societies, I think a good portion of the audience will think, oh yeah, you mean like that Slab City kind of thing? Well, yeah, okay, whatever. It's kooky and it's crazy and it's not for me. Well, guess what? I don't think it's for me either. I'm not moving out to Slab City anytime in the near future. But I'm still talking about the creation of parallel societies. Why is that? It's because we are not talking about the creation of a singular, monolithic entity known as the parallel society that will all look like Slab City, or name whatever might exist in your local context that corresponds to that idea. No, there will be many iterations of this among many different people. And the types of people who are drawn to Slab City? Great, go there. That's wonderful. Why would I stop you? and other people won't want anything to do with that type of place. Great. Wonderful. Go elsewhere and create your own structures to create a different form of parallel society. That's great. Multiple things. We can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. And it takes a strange authoritarian mindset, in my ever to be humble opinion, to look at the residents of something like a slab city and say, not only do I not want to live there, but you shouldn't live there either. You shouldn't enjoy living in such a place. You are probably actually having a horrible time, and such a thing can't work. Therefore, I won't allow you to live there. I hope the police do come in and raid you guys, or something along those lines. That, to me, is a sign that we, or those who would adopt such a mindset, not me, but people who would say such things, have adopted the mindset of their would-be oppressors. That, again, everyone must live within a singular system, and if you're doing it differently than the way I would do it, no way. All right. Unfortunately, I have now polluted our palate so that people are thinking specifically along the lines of things like Slab City. That is unfortunate because what I am attempting to do here is to talk about the broader idea of parallel societies, how they can develop, and the types of structures that would sustain them. And that, as I say, is such a mind-bogglingly tall order that no singular podcast is adequately going to bite off and chew all of that material in a nice handy-dandy 20-minute, 30-minute video? No. 10-minute video? Oh, come on. This is TikTok. 1 minute. Make it 1 minute, and you gotta be dancing with interpretive dance while you do it. So obviously, I can't possibly begin to do that today. But I think another thing that we should note with regards to parallel societies is that they are formed from parallel structures, as that Academy of Ideas video articulates, and as it goes on to demonstrate throughout the rest of that video that we did not see. There are parallel structures that are created by activists that inform and support the creation of parallel societies. And that is a doable task. That is something that at least we can start to think about and start to, okay, all right, so we can create these structures that we may not even have the intention that this is going to all come together into some sort of parallel society that's going to be off of the authoritarian grid or what have you. But each little piece can be something that we can use to carve out more and more of a space for that society. So what specifically, brass tacks, let's not talk in abstracts. What kinds of things are we talking about? Well, what kinds of things do you need in order to have a functioning parallel society that even has a chance of living and existing outside of the authoritarian space? Well, I mean, a parallel economy would be necessary, wouldn't it? And right there, is an idea for about 57 different editions of Solutions Watch and different aspects of parallel economy, parallel money systems, etc. that need to be thought about. How do people transact, and how can they transact in ways that are not bound by the rules of whoever is sitting in the seat of power, however many hundreds or thousands of miles from where you are in some capital city somewhere, who's signing pieces of paper that are suddenly magically making it impossible for you to do trades that you were doing yesterday. How do we escape that? Well, we have to start with the creation of a parallel economy. And there are many, many different aspects to that. One of which that I have covered in the past, for example, is the idea of a survival currency, which I articulated in a previous edition of the Corbett Report podcast proper. I will, of course, put that link in the show notes so you can review that material. I think it's incredibly important because we are still, as much as we were in the depths of the scamdemic, when people were being, for example, essentially railroaded out of the economy because they weren't masked or they weren't jabbed or what have you. Well, just at that time, it was increasingly important that, hey, maybe we should start thinking about how to avoid falling into this trap of using the government coin of the realm, which will soon, of course, become either a CBDC or some version of private bank digital currency. What's the difference? Corporate asked you to show me the difference. There is no difference. Yes, because obviously if we can be railroaded into certain economic activities, then our lives are circumscribed by our ability to transact with others. So we have to create parallel structures now, while we have the opportunity, that will, at the very least, ameliorate the effects of these crazy trade war, currency war, monetary paradigm shift that is happening all around us and that is going to accelerate like the snowball rolling down the hill. All right, again, manageable, bite-sized chunk, something specific, brass tacks. What do you mean by that? Well, here's one example of one window into one aspect of the creation of the parallel economy, which will be one of the structures that would support the creation of a parallel society. Redballoon.work. And for people who don't know about Red Balloon, it is a job-finding, job-seeker board online with a difference. And you can find that out at its About page, where it notes that founded in 2021, Red Balloon has quickly grown into America's largest and most successful non-woke job board and talent connector. Red Balloon is the marketplace's answer to the divisive and toxic cancel culture invading the American workplace. Red Balloon connects thousands of like-minded businesses with tens of thousands of reliable, career-minded job seekers who are looking for the freedom to work for employers that respect their constitutional rights and provide a positive workplace where merit and achievement are honored. Red Balloon honors and celebrates the founding liberties that have made the American free market system the most successful economic engine in the history of the world. We strive to empower employees to preserve their liberties for their workforce and to place talented Americans into careers that will value their freedom and prioritize their success. And this idea, founded in 2021, obviously in the depths of the scamdemic, where there was the ever-looming possibility of mandates of various form that were being foisted upon people. If you want to continue to work in this office, you better be jabbed, or you better be on your 8th booster, or you better be wearing the mask 24 hours a day, etc., etc. Well, at that time, people were casting about, looking for, well, how do I find an employer who's not going to subject me to these things? Maybe it's important that I align the thing that I do for most of my waking life with my actual philosophy and priorities and things that I would like the world to be like. Imagine that. So, for example, the founder and CEO of Andrew Krapuschetz, the founder of Red Balloon, had the idea for a job-seeking, freedom-preserving job-seeker board. And redballoon.work is what resulted from that idea. And I had the chance, very recently, to talk to Andrew Krapuschetz about Red Balloon, where it came from, the idea behind it, and how it informs the creation of a parallel economy.
So I live in Moscow, Idaho. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I did the .com thing down there. I got tired of traffic and liberal, so I moved up to Idaho 25 years ago. So I was an early adopter and leaving California. And I have been blessed to start quite a few businesses and do a bunch of exits over the years. So I think I've had 6 successful exits based on businesses that I've helped start or started myself. And all was going well and swimmingly. In fact, I was the CEO of one of the businesses that I started. It was about a $50 million tech business, but I'd already done a number of exits on that business, so I didn't have much ownership left. And 2020 came around, and my board basically said, "You're too conservative and Christian for our liking, and so we're just going to need to have you go." And this was a removal for perception, not performance. And so I was going to take a year off, play golf, hang out with my 5 kids, do commercial real estate, just do other things. And I kind of had this, challenge from a good friend who said, "Look, you just had to make a decision between your job and your values, and you had the financial wherewithal to pick your values and lose your job. But not everybody can make that decision as easily. So why don't you make a place for them to land if that happens to other Americans?" And this is slightly before the vaccine mandate kind of came down from the Biden administration. So initially it was just like, okay, fine, I'll do a pro-freedom job board. It's not going to be that big a deal. In fact, my brother and I kind of wrote it over a weekend in my basement. And we're like, okay, we did our thing. We're set. I'm going to get back to playing golf and hanging out with my kids. And then we get this call from Fox and Friends. They said, this vaccine mandate just came down, and your site says that employers that have a vaccine mandate, it's not the right fit for them. And I said, well, that's right, because if an adult wants to get a vaccine, they should go knock themselves out. But that's a decision that should come from a conversation with your doctor, not your HR department. And so anyway, so I'm on Fox and Friends, and actually, as embarrassing as it might sound, I didn't even know what Fox and Friends was because I didn't find media that interesting. And so I thought it was a kid's show, and I'm like, well, I guess I'll come on. It's kind of weird. Turns out it's kind of a big deal. So I'm on Fox and Friends, and all of a sudden, everyone is either offended or excited about what Red Balloon's doing. I got a lot of death threats and hate mail because I was standing up for freedom in the labor market, heaven forbid. And but I also got thousands and thousands of businesses and literally millions of job seekers who wanted to find freedom at work because they thought that was important for their family. So ta-da, that's where Red Balloon came from. It was an accident. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry, but it worked out.
All right. Yeah, that's a great background for the conversation. Let's talk specifically about the parallel economy. What does that term mean to you, and why is it important?
Yeah, in my mind, it is a moment, and I hope that it's not a moment that lasts forever. I've told many people I wish Red Balloon was not necessary. I wish that there was a place where freedom-loving job seekers and freedom-loving employers could find each other without having to worry that they're going to be hiring a traitor or finding a job that's just fully woke. But the reality is that Indeed.com famously, which is the biggest job board by a mile, they're absolutely enormous. They spend $1 billion a year on marketing. They have, over the last 4 years, canceled thousands of businesses. So businesses like Answers and Genesis, they was told you may never post jobs on Indeed again because of where you stand on creation and religion. You have businesses like a construction company in Texas that we talked to. They put God-fearing and freedom-loving on their company description, which they are fully in their rights to do, and Indeed said you are never allowed to post jobs with us again because you did this. And we know the famous cancellations, whether it was Parler or people getting kicked off, the old Twitter or Facebook or any of these things, or shadow banning, whatever they are, right? It's basically the mainstream economy kicked a lot of people out, and they kicked out a lot of people who are hardworking, industrious, who wanted to take care of their families and build their community, right? So what happens when you do that? Well, those people are like, well, okay, fine. I guess I need to go do my own thing. And that's really what Red Balloon came from, is when employers like Answers in Genesis, or this construction company, or countless others come to us and say, hey, we're evidently not allowed to participate in this market that is Indeed.com to find employees, but we're still growing as a business and we need those employees. So can you help us out? So I would say the parallel economy was born out of a necessity that we need to be able to continue to do things, but it has turned into a safety mechanism, because when you start to build some scale in this parallel economy or freedom economy, whatever you want to call it, when you build scale there, it's really interesting, because now we hear less cancellation stories. Part of that's a cultural shift that's happening. But there's also this, okay, well, that's actually is not as much of a penalty as it used to be. It just actually means you're losing a customer. So if you're Indeed or you're Salesforce or Greenhouse or any of these big tech companies and you kick a customer out, well, they're just going to go find another vendor who's happy to work with them, and probably one that they should have been working with anyway because their values aligned, right? And so all of a sudden there's this shift that the big tech companies, the companies that were doing the cancellation, lost their power. They don't have the ability to penalize people in the same way because there is a parallel economy. So it's turned into a safety mechanism, even though it merely started out of a necessity for a way to be able to continue to work.
Once again, that is Andrew Krapuschetz of redballoon.work. And if you are an American who happens to be in the position of either hiring people or wanting to be hired, and if you are concerned about such things as potential mandates for the bird flu or the whatever, monkeypox or whatever nonsense scamdemic might be coming down the line, or anything else along those lines, maybe you have concerns about DEI policies or what have you, well, at the very least, you could check out redballoon.work and see if it will help to facilitate connections that might make sense for you in your own walk of life. And that is an incredibly important part. Just one tiny part, but a part that is essential nonetheless to the functioning of a parallel society that would have any chance of enduring. Obviously, if we cannot go outside of the bounds of the mainstream establishment, for example, job fora, that are out there to facilitate work in a certain way, then how can we create different structures that will, for example, maybe be resistant to the diktats of some politician in some office in some capital city, however many hundreds or thousands of miles away, who are writing down things on pieces of paper? Maybe if there's going to be a chance of resistance to such diktats, it would come from having people of like mind being able to discover each other and connect in a mutually beneficial relationship. Wow, imagine that. So I hope you're starting to see how this is obviously just one tiny sliver of a piece of the broader question of building a parallel society, but every single tiny little sliver / piece of that broader picture is important and necessary. These are all fundamental building blocks that will be necessary for the creation of a parallel economy that will then undergird a parallel society. And even if we're simply just confining ourselves to that question of the parallel economy, there are many considerations that we could and should be taking a look at. For example, as I raised the specter of earlier, the question of currency. How do you transact with others? In what medium do you interact and transact with others? An incredibly important question, because again, what politicians are deciding, or bankers or whoever are deciding in some center of power, some distant center of power, should that have control over you and your life and the way that you're transacting with those around you? Well, if you, again, want to have any chance of being able to resist the, for example, inflationary measures of a money-printing central bank, well, maybe you should be transacting in something other than the money. That is the only thing that people understand as money these days, the fiat currency. Maybe there needs to be other things that we start exploring as ways of transacting with others. So as I said before, I did episode 394 on Solutions Survival Currency, that if you haven't seen it, or even if you have, is worth a watch or rewatch, because it's right in line with this. But also here on the Solutions Watch podcast, back in July of 2021, I was talking to Catherine Austin Fitz about Cash Friday. A simple idea. In fact, using the coin of the realm, the legal tender of the land, by which I mean cash, not the electronic digits on screens that pass for money these days. No, the actual physical cash, which, say what you will about its devaluation, etc., at the very least, cannot, at least at this point, be tracked, traced, and controlled and prohibited from a distance in the same way that an electronic transaction can be, and increasingly is becoming circumscribed. So, Cash Friday was an idea that was floated here a couple of years ago. A simple idea. How about just one day a week? Just committing yourself to only transacting in cash. I'm not going to be carrying a card or using my phone or what have you to make transactions. I'm going to support those businesses that accept cash, which is also a great way of finding businesses in your area and like-minded people who are interested in facilitating those types of connections, right? It's a way of forming community as well as transacting for daily needs. And as, of course, Catherine Austin Fitz posited in that edition of Solutions Watch, yes, if you can do it one day a week, why not two? If two, why not three? Etc. It can be a way of incrementally getting towards a goal of carving out a larger and larger space for freedom. And okay, so there's a lot of monetary considerations and a lot of ideas on the table for different ways, alternative currencies, complementary currencies, cash, etc. Well, okay, so there's the currency side of this. How about markets? How do you find and connect with businesses that are in line with your goals and your ideals? Well, how do you find businesses that aren't connected to BlackRock or owned by State Street or what have you? How do you find businesses that will actually support the creation of a parallel economy? Well, you'll need some sort of parallel marketplace, and there are examples of that exist. For example, back in 2020, you will recall that I talked to Mike Swatik of agorist.market about the Agorist marketplace at agorist.market, which I know that some people in my audience have used and continue to cite, which I'm glad to see. But of course, that is just an example, and one that hopefully will be used by many other people throughout the world, and as a way of connecting people of like mind in ways that may or may not be expressly prohibited or condoned by whatever would-be ruling authoritarian sits in the seat of power in whatever capital city happens to control whatever arbitrarily defined geographical piece of land you happen to inhabit. And on that note, well, yes, Agorist.market, as you will hopefully recall, was also an incredibly important part of another idea, Black Market Fridays, which was broached again in 2021 here on Solutions Watch with Solutions Watch all-star guest, recurring guest, Ernest Hancock of freedomsphoenix.com. Again, I'll put the link in the show notes so you can remind yourself about the Black Market Friday idea and what that entailed. But that's by way of introduction to another incredibly important part of this. Okay, great. It's good to have some sort of online marketplace where you can find people in your neighborhood, in your general area, in your region, in your country, in the globe that would be willing to transact with you. And maybe you can find a way to do that may or may not be out of the purview of various government thefters who want to get in the way of all of your transactions, etc. Okay, that's true. But at the very least, you'll need a communication system in order to facilitate such connections and transactions. And how do you start thinking about the creation of a parallel communication system? Well, I have, again, this is something that I have talked about before on Solutions Watch. You will remember I've talked about decentralized communication systems and the many, many different ideas for platforms, applications, and entirely new networks and ways of sending bits and bytes through the ether that are coming online these days. But how about something more brass tacks? Something that would service, for example, a local community area. Well, again, I have talked about wireless mesh networking as an example of how to create a network that will not be dependent on the broader internet or internet access. That you may be able to connect into the internet, but that will not be the core of the network itself. Well, again, that's a great idea, and there are some examples of how it's been done in various locales at various times using various technologies, but the technology for creating such a wireless mesh network is actually gaining in leaps and bounds every single year, and it is becoming more and more and more feasible to do it for relatively extremely low cost, and it's becoming more and more of an effective technology. And I say this advisedly, because I was just talking to All-Star Solutions Watch recurring guest Ernest Hancock on Declare Your Independence from freedomsphoenix.com, and he was informing me about a project that he's been working on in relation to his larger project, occupytheland.org. Well, let's put a pin on that, because I think we'll be coming back to Occupy the Land in the future on Solutions Watch. But I was talking to Ernest Hancock specifically about what he was doing to test communication systems for his little Occupy the Land idea that he's working on out there in the wilds of Arizona and the land that he has acquired out there, and testing a wireless mesh network that, hey, looks like it will have at least a 13-mile radius with 100 and 200 megs download speeds available for, again, very, very, very low cost and low power inputs that could actually be run on solar panels. It's an incredible, interesting project that he's working on, and let's listen to a bit of that conversation from my recent appearance on Declare Your Independence, where Ernest Hancock was detailing that project.
Knowing this, communication has always been the thing. You have to get off of their grid. You have to bypass their surveillance, their financial control, their social and economic engineering, your social credit score, your all this, and just live. You know, I have something. I wish to sell something. I wish to buy something. I want to know what you got. I want to trade, barter, negotiate, whatever, outside of this system. Now, James, you remember you and I, Mike Swatek, that did Agorist.market, had a stroke towards the end of last year. So he's kind of limited and stuff, he's recovering. Agorist.market, you know, we did Pirates Without Border, no, it was blackmarketfridays.com. Yeah, blackmarketfridays.com goes to that site, which was basically using the tech that, you know, we need to use a mesh network. It bypasses everything, and you do individual, they list all their stuff, but you do individual transactions with them. You know, direct messaging, you do your crypto purchase, and you're done. And it doesn't have a central node of anything. Well, we needed to have total mesh communication outside of the internet. Well, John was a telecommunications guy, whatever, when he was in the Norway army. He's from Norway. Well, he fell in love, met a Canadian girl. Now he lives in Winnipeg, so it's always a woman. So what happens is his day job is telecommunications. So I asked him. I go, John, man, we need to. I've been asking everybody. I've been doing a lot of interviews and working with different people, and finally he goes, well, the technology now is, blah, 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 blah. We bought a dish antenna. It's only about, 15 inches in diameter. We got 2 of those, one for me, one for Bob. We just installed Bob's today. Then we had to have a relay that we put up on a mountain, but how far could it go? We went 13 miles and got 200 megabytes download and 100 up. And I'm going, holy crap, it's over. So tomorrow, we already tested it. Now we just got to find a remote mountain, which we got plenty of. So we're doing that in a relay between Bob and I because we don't have direct line of sight. We probably could do it anyway, but we need a high quality relay. So we did. I'll show some of the pictures so people can see what we're doing. Yeah, this is the report on it. That is the relay. Now, the reason it's got kind of a V in it, it's a 120-degree sweep. And we could have gone wider because we put the love bus out at over at like 140 degrees, and it still had 100 megabytes. We're like, damn, this thing kicks ass. So we went way out in the desert and put it on the back of my Montero on a pole, and we just kept going further and further until we couldn't go any further. It's mountain range to mountain range. I'm like, oh, hell yeah. So now that mountain range that you see in the background there, that's where I live. Like the middle peak back there, it's way back there. So we're going very cool. Now he's checking the speeds there and so on. And this is where that range is where we were. Now we're at our land here, and I'm on top of the bus there, and it's that's how far it would go. And then we put it on top, and then we went and put it up, and so on top of the car. And then we went to the first overpass and checked it, and then wow, that was good. I-10, that's about 3, 4, 5 miles, from my home, and we tested it there. Then we just kept going further and further out, and when he hooked it up, it took like 10 seconds, 30 seconds or whatever. Boom, the relay. And that's the battery pack there. You'll see that case is the solar comes in, charge control of the battery. So we put that out there, and it's self-sustaining. And we have a battery, and it only, check this out. How much power do you think it takes for that relay to cover like 500 square miles? Just take a guess. How many watts?
A couple hundred.
6 watts. 6 watts. 6. Let me say that again. 6 watts. So a little battery. Wow. Those batteries. That's just a little lead acid. ATV starter battery, Harbor Freight or something I got. I have a bunch of stuff laying around. We put that in there. We have a little solar panel, and so that just from the power of the battery, it can go. What'd you say? How many hours?
38, I think.
38
It could probably
hours.
be a lot more, but yeah, 38.
38 hours with no sun. I'm just, holy crap. So I was going, okay, all right. We should do something with that. We should do something with that. So what we did is we created the 2 dishes that go on, our place. And then we have the report on his computer screen came out at 300 and something megabytes, several miles away. But we went from mountain range to mountain range, and that was over 200 megabytes, download 100 up. That's more than I get out of my Starlink. And now we're able to link it in with the Starlink so we can use our Starlink or this communication system. And that was important because I wanted to be able to send hashes, links, URLs, text, and crypto addresses. So Bob and I test that today. So it's done. It's done. Done, 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 done,
Bernie,
done.
this
done.
is so important. This is so awesome, but I fear some people in the audience do not understand why this is important. Tell people what they can do with a local area mesh network that is off the grid and that can be completely off the grid. How could you use that in a community that wants to build up a parallel economy?
You just went through it. It's called the lockdown. And what happens when they lock you down? And what do they want to turn off? Communication. Whenever there's any kind of rebellion, uprising, or you're just educating your own kids, growing your own food, selling the whatever, did you have a health permit for that and your tax ID number if we get some? And this just bypasses everything. There's no surveillance. It's encrypted. They can't see anything. There's nothing for them to see. So and the channel, the storage of it, instead of it being like Telegram or whatever, it's you. That's it. It's over. Because the one thing that when the lockdown happened, as Donna and I were traveling the country on the Love Bus Liberty Tour, we were in rural areas. We kind of avoided the highway. We went, the byways and so on in the background of, away from the cities and different counties where people were being oppressed, and we'd go make signs and help them, and they request that we come there. And how they were surviving is they would have their own community networks for food, for help, for labor, for parts, for machining, for everything. They were not without. If you lived in the city, you're screwed, okay? So this was so that you can feed yourself. Feed yourself. So that's what Occupy the Land was all about. I'm going, look, I know what's going on. When you got Klaus Schwab coming out and going, you'll own nothing and here's your happy shot, I'm going, oh, hell no. And you need the where did you get your information on vaccines and the damage? And it was always alternative media. It was always somebody out in the hinterland of something. And when you get satellite communication or mesh networks or all of a sudden the opinions, the news, the experiences of people in flyover country and all that red that you would see in the counties of the election and so on, you would have all these people out there that are finally now able to share their opinion. They're able to insert their news. They're able to take all this information and filter it with their mind. You can grow your own food, source your own water, build your own shelter, educate your own kids, create your own markets. This is what communication does. It is important. And when you have cryptos, you can communicate prices, value. This is, you can't stop it. That was the point. And I've been screaming this forever.
Once again, that is the effervescent and irrepressible Ernest Hancock of freedomsphoenix.com. On my regular appearance on the Declare Your Independence radio show, I'm on every other week, and that was our previous week's conversation. And wow, very exciting stuff. I hope people understand the importance of projects like these, that in and of themselves, completely considered in isolation, may seem like some interesting technological project. But when it is put into its proper context, that is, as a fundamental building block of a piece, of a segment of a parallel economy that could become a fundamental building block of a parallel society, I hope people start to understand the real value and importance of projects like these and what they portend for a future that is not subject to the whims of whatever would-be authoritarian is in whatever seat of power that claims to rule over you at the moment. So, as I say, I hope, if nothing else, this all too brief exploration of the concept of parallel societies today, I hope at the very least it has broached the subject and put things together in a way that hopefully contextualizes and makes sense of a lot of the work that I've been doing here on Solutions Watch and a lot of the work that I will continue to do. How do we in every single person listening to this, in your particular path of life, the things that you know, the experiences you have, the connections you have, the resources you have, the things that you can do, the skills that you possess, how can they be applied towards the creation of some part of a parallel structure that could inform the creation of a parallel society? And I like to think that when people see it contextualized in that way and realize the very, very big idea that all of these little pieces connect to, they can understand that even the tiny little thing that you're working on can be a part of that much bigger story. And I hope that is a motivating idea, because the one thing that I do know is that the parallel societies of the future, not the parallel society, but the parallel societies that will be formed out of the acts of activists like these ones, will not be formed by the people who stick their thumb up their butt and their fingers in their ears and just say, nothing will ever change and the only thing we can do is vote for another politician to set things right. No, no, no. The world will change because people are actively engaged in projects to make change in the world. And that is why I am highlighting things like this on a weekly basis here on Solutions Watch. So, I've broached the large topic of the creation of parallel societies today, and it is something that I think we will be returning to time and time again, sometimes in the micro-granular detail of specific projects that will go towards the creation of a singular fundamental building block that could become part of parallel society, and sometimes we'll talk about the big idea. Anyway, that being said, all of the notes to everything that I've talked about and cited today will be in the show notes, obviously, at CorbettReport.com. So please go there and avail yourself of those resources to start expanding and branching out from here and thinking about how this might apply to whatever projects you may or may not be engaged in. And on that note, I'm sure, again, we'll be covering this in greater detail in many, many future editions of Solutions Watch to come. Having said that, I'm going to leave you today with some more words from that video, which we opened with today, Parallel Societies versus Totalitarianism, How to Create a Free World. And even after watching this clip, you won't have seen the entire video, so I will once again recommend that you go and watch that entire video and read the accompanying essay. Having said that, I'm going to leave today's final words to Academy of Ideas. I'm for Solutions Watch and Corbett Report material generally in the near future.
Possibilities: consuming independent media instead of legacy media, using alternative mediums of exchange rather than government-backed fiat currencies, using social media platforms and decentralized digital infrastructures that promote freedom of expression, or supporting local businesses rather than global corporations that further the agenda of the political establishment. It could amount to creating self-sustainable communities, conducting scientific inquiry or scholarship free of institutional pressures, or consuming and creating educational resources, art, music, or literature that pays no heed to the establishment status quo. Any action or enterprise that expands the realm of freedom while creatively circumventing censorship and top-down authoritarian or totalitarian control is a boon to the parallel society. For as Egon Bundy, one of the leading figures of the Czech underground, explained, when the activity of those who oppose the establishment becomes articulated, it will be in forms, methods, and ideas that are totally unknown, incomprehensible, and unacceptable to members of the establishment, and that is how it should be. Once a parallel society is sufficiently established, a society is no longer under the same grave danger as when it relies solely on the structures and institutions that are appendages of the tyrannical state. For if these establishment structures collapse, parallel structures will soften the blow of an economic or social breakdown. Furthermore, parallel structures cater to the authentic needs and wants of the people rather than the political class, and so they tend to be more life-promoting than the establishment structures. As parallel structures develop and solidify, more and more people will instinctively turn towards them, and as the parallel society expands, so too does the sphere of cultural, economic, and political freedom. A genuine parallel society would, by a process of metastasis, penetrate all the important social structures. And as Václav Havel further explains, the ultimate phase of this process is the situation in which the official structures simply begin withering away and dying off, to be replaced by new structures that have evolved from below, and are put together in a fundamentally different way. In 1988, a year before communism in Eastern Europe collapsed, Ivan Urus reflected on the growth of the parallel society and on the dramatic social changes that were following in the wake. The parallel society has proven its worth, he wrote, and it is the only meaningful structure that people can create if they do not wish to remain mere appendices of the political and social structures created by the ruling power.